Welcome back. The first detailed report on the state of wastewater treatment in South Africa in 9 years was released recently. It indicates that just 23 wastewater systems out of 995 assessed have qualified for the prestigious Green Drop certification. For more on this, we're joined by Professor Mike Muller from the Wits School of Governance. Professor Muller, very good evening to you. Thank you for your time. Perhaps let's start on a more general basis. When we refer to wastewater treatment works, what exactly are we talking about?
Yeah, I think it's an important question, Paul. What we're dealing with are the plants which municipalities build and run, which collect all the wastewater, which we flush out of our homes, down our toilets, from our baths, from our kitchen, and which industry also dumps water into those wastewater pipes, which all runs down towards a lower point, and somewhere before it gets put into a river, you need to make sure that it is actually not just untreated waste, which can be harmful and is certainly very unpleasant. So what we're talking about with wastewater treatment are those plants, sewage works we used to call them, which treat the waste from people's houses and from businesses and industry and make it less harmful to the environment, but also especially less harmful to people. Very important function, not one we like to talk about, and that's part of the problem that we have with wastewater. People find it a little unpleasant to talk about.
And it's concerning because this report now reveals some shocking revelations when it comes to the alarming and unacceptable state of wastewater treatment works in the country, saying the trouble here is that some municipalities are increasingly incapable of addressing this matter.
Yeah, and part of the problem is that if you go and speak to a municipal manager, they'll tell you they get lots and lots of complaints about water not coming out of the taps, clean water. But if the wastewater, the sewage works isn't working very well, they'll get one or two people who will complain bitterly. Maybe they want to fish, maybe they want to swim in the river, maybe downstream there's somebody who takes water out of the river and doesn't like it because it's been polluted. But they get much more focus and complaint about water supply than they do about wastewater treatment. And so when you go and look, you find that it's the wastewater treatment that gets neglected and the production of clean water and the distribution where people try and focus. And that's why it's important to have this Green Drop report. We need to remember that all the water we use, a lot of it ends up as waste in the environment, and we need to manage that so that it doesn't damage our health and doesn't damage the environment.
And those dangers can be fatal, as we, of course, make reference to what happened in Bloemhof in 2014, where at least 18 babies died and over 200 people hospitalized from that negligence.
Well, you see, we need to be careful. Those babies died and the people were hospitalized because they were consuming contaminated water, but actually that was a problem on the water supply side. And it was made worse, and we had similar cases a couple of years before that in Delmas, where people polluted the water source. And then if the water supply wasn't properly treated, you were taking polluted water and you were just sending it back into the households, into the towns. And that was what made people sick in Bloemhof and what also actually caused a small typhoid outbreak in Delmas some years ago. So we do need to worry about it. But, Paul, I should emphasize that if you go and speak to people about what they are worried about wastewater, the first thing they'll tell you is they don't want sewage running outside their houses or in the streets or, being coming across their land. And quite often, and we must remember the Green Drop looks at this, the problem is that even if you get the wastewater works working properly, the wastewater doesn't get to them because the drains are blocked and the sewage spills into the streets. I'm sure you've seen it. I know I've seen it in Johannesburg and Cape Town, where you have sewage running down the street. And that is actually very, very dangerous for health, particularly if you've got children playing around, walking up and down from school, playing in the street. They're playing in sewage, and that is a very risky business. So it's not just the wastewater treatment plants we're worried about. It's also, is the wastewater getting into the pipes and getting to those treatment plants and then being treated properly? And a lot of attention is focused on the plants, but quite honestly, I'm just as worried about those sewage spills in the roads and in our towns and our households, because that causes quite a lot of problems and is actually quite dangerous as well.
What's missing in this report when it comes to underlying and creating awareness and transparency on some of the problems?
Well, look, you know, the important thing is that it's reminded everybody, brought our attention back to the fact that we really do have a problem managing our wastewater in the country. Remember, for 7 years, there hasn't been a report because, I have to say, government was too embarrassed to even let it be published, which is, you know, not a good sign. So we've got to congratulate the minister for biting the bullet and saying this is where we are. But awareness is the first step. The next is make sure there's enough capability in the organizations. We know the municipalities don't have the right capabilities, particularly not at the leadership level. Quite often we've got some quite good technicians, but if the technicians aren't properly supervised and supported, they can't make things work. So we've got to get good people at the leadership level, and we've got to get enough money, and we've got to get the priority from the municipality to keep it working. And that has been lacking, I'm afraid to say.
I suppose this also speaks to the very important matter of human rights violations. I mean, the community bears the brunt here. We've seen with the service delivery protest and people's dissatisfaction on the ground.
Yes, well, you see, one of the things about the green drop, and it says so in the report, is they don't look at people who aren't connected to sewer pipes. So all the people in rural areas who have on-site sanitation, and, you know, we talk about pit toilets as though they're evil. Pit toilets can be a very effective situation in a rural context where you've got a lot of space and the ground is solid enough and you can dig a hole and build a proper toilet building on top of it. But if you don't have a toilet at all, then what you find is that human waste is spread in the environment, and that causes, health problems. So the human right should start with worrying about whether people have got access to a decent, safe toilet, and then we can start worrying about if they are lucky enough to have a flush toilet and the wastewater goes into a sewer, does that get to the sewage works? Does it get properly treated? And we mustn't make the mistake of worrying most about the sewage treatment and forgetting that perhaps a third of the people in the country don't have decent, safe sanitation in their homes. And that, again, is part of the challenge. Do we look after the wastewater treatment to protect the rivers, or do we look first to get decent toilets into people's homes to protect those people's health and dignity? And it's a very difficult balance. One has to sympathize with the municipalities. They've got a lot of calls on their time and money and their capabilities. Where do they start? And quite often, as we've seen, the wastewater treatment plant actually is one of the areas that just gets neglected in the face of all those other challenges.
So this Green Drop program is administered by the National Department of Water and Sanitation, which of course would bring in questions around accountability. What happens now? This information has been placed under the spotlight. The problems are out for everyone to see. What processes need to follow?
Well, the National Department is the regulator. They set the policy and they must monitor and make sure people perform according to policy. But, we have this tension between national and provincial and municipal governments. They're all autonomous and independent. National can't tell a municipality what to do. That's the argument. In fact, national government can say to municipalities, you get a certain amount of money from national government. The Constitution tells you what you're supposed to do with it, amongst other things, provide basic services like water supply and sanitation. And if you're not doing that, we really have to insist that if you don't do it, we'll have to find an alternative solution. And maybe we'll have to take over those functions. But then, of course, you've got a new group of people faced with all of these difficult questions, and they tend not to have the same level of accountability and engagement with the population. And they often don't work for long enough in a place to be able to make the changes needed and to keep them working. So it is quite a problem for national government to regulate municipalities. One of the interesting things that came out of this report, though, is that some of the metro municipalities, including Johannesburg and Tshwane and Gqeberha and Mangaung, actually didn't get a single of their sewage works given the green drop. So our big metros aren't managing their sewage works properly either. And funnily enough, Ekurhuleni in Gauteng was one which actually did very, very well. And what was interesting is that in Ekurhuleni, there's a whole separate organization, ERWAT, the East Rand Water and Sanitation Treatment Company, which is owned by Ekurhuleni. It's a public company, and they're allowed to just get on and do one piece of work, treat the wastewater. And they've done it very well. They got, I think, 12 Green Drop awards for their different plants. And what that says is perhaps we need to take this function out of the general municipality and give it to people who can run it. And unfortunately, the local government is going to have to give some of their money to those organizations. And of course, that's what they don't want to do. They want to hold on to the money, but then they must be able to demonstrate that they're using it properly. And at present, they certainly can't demonstrate that. So I look at Ekurhuleni and its public East Rand Water Company, Water Treatment Company, and say, well, what is that telling us about the future? Perhaps there are some things which are just too complicated for municipalities to do. Let's hand it over, whether it's to private or to public organizations that can specialize and do that job properly. I think we're going to see much more of that discussion in the months and years to come.
Very well. Thank you so much for your time and, of course, weighing in here. Professor Mike Muller from the Wits School of Governance is speaking to some of the really shocking revelations here, speaking on the state of wastewater treatment in South Africa, which a report was released in 9 years, which shows that 23 wastewater systems out of 995 assessed qualify for this prestigious award. So really a lot of questions around the state of how municipalities run these wastewater systems.